It is great to have him back. He is Dr. Tyler Standifird. Tyler, good to see you again. You've been a busy man. How are you?
Yeah, always busy, but man, what a treat to come back and chat with you again, Mark. I had a lot of fun last time. I'm looking forward to this time as well.
Well, last time you were the guy that was sort of stuck in the research lab doing all this research with college golfers and all this sort of stuff. And you shared the insights on this podcast back in, when was it, 2022? And
Yeah.
it was popular. And since then, Superspeed has hooked you up. And so you're a very busy man right now, huh?
Yeah, and it's all fun stuff, right? I mean, speed's the name of the game, but there's a lot of nuances of speed, Mark, that I think are we're trying to understand better and trying to help golfers get the very most out of everything they're doing from a training standpoint, from a sequencing standpoint. So it's been for sure a fun ride.
Okay. You're the guy I turn to when it comes to speed insights. And you, a ways back, might have been 22, sent me this red grip. And this was right at the outset of all your research. And you're like, I am proving, or I have proved, that grip pressure has a real influence on club head speed. Now, for most folks listening to this, they're like, okay, these guys have really lost their minds because all they hear is about GRF, ground reaction forces, blah, 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 blah. You've proved otherwise. So tell us how grip pressure actually influences speed.
Yeah, and it's important, Mark, to understand that, I mean, that's the last piece of the chain between us and the golf club, right?
Mhm.
Is how our hands interact with that golf club. And so while yes, the things that we're doing in the ground are going to influence body motion and club motion, eventually it comes down to the hands, right? And you've got to be able to utilize your hands, your release patterns really effectively. And yeah, I've been diving into that in a lot of detail and really seeing that again, what we tend to see in players is that as players who are faster tend to have higher grip strengths, right? We can see that with long drive guys whose grip strengths are just off the charts. Our professional players who again, very strong grip strength. And I've been able to look at a lot of amateur golfers, now well over 100, looking at grip strength and club head speed and see definitely some relationships there, right, Mark? I never jump to the causation,
Mhm.
but definitely some relationships as we start to see the importance of grip strength. And then I think you brought up too, Mark, grip pressure, which to me, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding on those two things and which one really ties in and how they tie into club head speed.
Yeah, I think I'd love to mine that a little bit because, look, the grip strength to me kind of goes without saying because a strong guy is going to have strong hands. I mean, I think of the DP World Tour, they did the social media bits
Mhm.
some stage ago where they had this thing that measures force produced, and you could see some golfers produced a lot of force through their hands and fingers. But the grip pressure to me is a biggie. And that's not the like the death hold that locks up
Mhm.
the entire body. It's having that kinetic chain, that fluidity, if you will, but then in the fingers and that there's pressure enough to really maintain control, I guess. Yes.
Yeah, and I like to get a little bit scientific, Mark,
Please.
because as a teacher, teach a principle. The principle here that you're referring to is this idea called centripetal acceleration, which is basically the idea that when you have objects that rotate, there's something that has to tie them back into the axis of rotation. In a golf club, it would be tying the golf club back to our body. I think really nice examples are like a tether ball, or if I had a tennis ball swinging around my head, right? The string and the tension I place on that string creates the centripetal acceleration, which ties that object to my hands. Otherwise, the object just flies off into space. And so
Yeah.
that's what our hands are really kind of doing in the golf swing. And as that golf club starts to move faster and faster and faster, the amount of force that we have to produce to keep it tied into our hands and be moving effectively goes up, right? The faster we swing, the more pressure we would have to produce during the swing. And so sometimes I think what players do is if they lack that strength to produce the right amount of pressure, then they might start doing some things with their swing, like maybe some early release patterns and some difficulty with some club face control. Just they end up not creating speed in the very best way, or in a really negative effect, they just start swinging their club a little slower
Yeah.
because they know they don't want the club to fly out of their hands.
Yeah. As a teacher, I would venture that, because at the end of all of this, and this is where you and I are going to dive into in a little while. I'm seeing so many folks that hear just enough on YouTube or on one other podcast about ground reaction forces. And then the next thing they're bouncing around like kangaroos on the driving range. And they are just, they're littering golf courses with golf balls. So we're going to talk about that. And I almost want to say with that grip strength, grip pressure thing, at the end of every shot, there's a target.
Mhm.
And I don't care how hard and fast you go, if you're not propelling the ball in a functional direction,
Yeah.
speed power is essentially wasted.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, Mark, the ability you created this idea of like creating the appropriate tension and pressure in the fingers and hands while not getting the rest of the body tensioned and tight.
Mhm.
And I think the way we can explain this is with some simple math where let's say I take a professional golfer who has a grip strength, they can squeeze, we'll just say 50 kilograms.
Okay.
And maybe in the swing, they get up to 7 or 8 out of 10 at their max points their swing. And I've seen a lot of most every player gets up to that area. Well, 7 or 8 out of 10 of 50, that puts them about in the 40 range. The problem becomes if amateur golfer Joe on our weekend golfer who his maximum grip strength is 38 kilograms, his 7 out of 10 is now maybe 32 kilograms versus the 40 of the professional
Mhm.
versus the 50 of the long drive. And so that's where, 7 out of 10, yes, it's maybe the same pressure, the same feel, but it's not always the same raw force. And I think that's where, Mark, you can kind of end up with these difficulties. I would never suggest that an amateur golfer needs to just death grip the club.
Mhm.
But I do think there would be a huge benefit if they do have weak grip strength to raise the ceiling on their grip strength so that they can elevate the force they produce during the swing, but doing so a little bit less tensioned.
There's so many things. Okay, I still want you, in the interests of understanding, to define for the viewers and listeners the difference between centripetal and centrifugal. But first off, I first want to stay where you are because I'm expecting, now I've not seen your research. And as a kid, I remember a wily, wise old man gave me an old tennis ball and said, "Yeah, just squeeze on this thing." And I might not be the strongest guy in the world, but my forearms are strong. Um, I'm expecting throughout the golf swing that the amount of force produced through the hands changes. Am I wrong or am I right? And if so, where do you find the highest change?
Yeah, you're 100% correct in that, especially in the better players, right? They
Okay.
tend to think about it this way, where you need that extra force anytime the club is beginning movement, stopping movement, changing directions. And so, in a simplistic way, you're going to need a little bit to get the club moving,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're going to need a little bit more to kind of get that club to stop in transition and change directions. Interestingly enough, actually, through impact, a lot of times that force can drop a little bit,
Yeah.
especially in really good players. Like the thing I see out there a lot is videos of great players like a Freddie Couples, VJ Singh, these kind of guys who like it almost looks like they're not even hanging on to the club through impact. Well,
Mm-hmm.
again, they've already delivered all of that energy out to the club head. And then also the beauty of professional players is they tend to hit the ball very square on the club face. And so they don't
It
tend to
doesn't
have to
twist.
worry a lot about the
It's
idea of,
just,
hey, a miss hit twists things, right? It's interesting. There was a cool research study where people took tennis balls and threw them at tennis rackets.
mm-hmm.
And if they hit it right in the center of the tennis racket would just kind of displace a little bit, ball would bounce
Yeah.
off. You already know where I'm going. If the
Yeah.
tennis ball moves a little bit away from that center of the tennis racket, now all of a sudden we get all these twisting effects of the tennis racket due to the torques, balls bouncing all over the place. And so in reality, I think it's interesting that the players who maybe like don't need as much grip strength, you could say, at impact because they hit the ball so squarely every time, actually tend to be the players with a lot of grip strength in their hands, right?
Yeah, yeah, man, I'm gonna stay here for a little while because you're jogging all this stuff inside of my mind, Tyler. And the first thing is, um, so many folks with like buckling and broken down
Uh,
tops of the backswing, that's the loss of the grip pressure. And then I don't know who told me, but since I was just a brand new golf teacher back in 1996, I'm dating myself. I was told that if for a right hander, if there's trouble down the left, hold tighter in your left hand with the last three fingers. That'll sort of eliminate the face closing prematurely.
Hmm. Hmm.
If there's trouble down the right, loosen those a touch and hold tighter with the right hand. That'll help the face to release some. This works. I
Yeah.
mean, I'll take that to my grave.
Yeah.
But with the other day, there was this golf team, college golf team that traveled down, and I'm going to give them a shout out. They're from Mount Vernon, Nazarene. And they traveled down to Columbus and they worked with me. And a lot of these kids wanted to be good. And I could see how they're all trying to control the club face so much through the ball and they're hanging on real tight and the face is never releasing. And so
Yeah.
it's like, stop. And there were a group of men and a group of ladies. And I'm like, okay, space yourself out. We don't want to hurt each other. And every one of you, I want you to take your 7-iron, swing back, and try and throw this golf club as far down the driving range as you could. And you can imagine people threw the club over their shoulder, nearly hurt folks. People would let go too late, largely,
Yeah.
and the thing would go flying over their shoulder this way. And to me, you talk about how the good player, Freddie and them, the tightness at the top quickly, it's almost like the release to release the club right down the range. You have to let go of it prior to the
Yeah.
base of the arc. And that's the gravitational influence you talk about, yes?
Yeah, and it's why when we look at things like hand speed in the swing, it's peaking before impact, right? Your hand speed doesn't peak at impact. You build all the speed in your hands via the force and the time that you apply that force. And then just as you said really nicely, right, you start to ease up a little bit to get that energy delivered out to the club. And frankly, to be honest, Mark, you mentioned this idea of people getting excited about ground reaction force and things like that. And again, I'm a ground reaction force guy.
Mhm.
You know that from our last conversations. But man, there is so much opportunity for golfers to create club speed through the hands. And I almost think like for whatever reason, we started teaching this held off release, this delayed release, all these kind of things. And in reality, like all we're doing is creating difficulty with face control and then also just really suppressing speeds a lot. And again, I'm not sure where that came from, Mark, but I wish we could get more of the mindset of a little more force in your hands statically, better dynamics, and being willing to create these nice release patterns.
I'll tell you where that comes from. And I'm battling against this. I've been battling against this. And I have a voice with this microphone next to me. And I'll listen to both sides of the equation. But the advent of the very closed club face has resulted in folks having to hang on to that thing real tight in order to get the golf ball toward the target. And some of the freest, long swinging, longest hitters, VJ Singh, Fred Couples, Ernie Els, all of them play with a more neutral club face. That thing isn't shut at the top because if
Yeah,
it is, you're working awfully hard to keep the face square.
yeah, for sure.
Okay, that's enough of it. And I do want to say this: ground reaction force is real.
Yeah,
We all know it. You've proved it. You've got some awesome videos on your social media and on YouTube showing great illustrations. Um, and you talk about the hands and you can make speed there. I feel like if the hand strength, pressure, all that sort of stuff is correct, that kinetic sequence you speak of, energy can flow out through there. But if you're holding on
yeah.
tight, it essentially stalls right there by your wrists, and the club face and the ball never feel it.
For sure. And I almost think, Mark, and these are things that I want to study more of, but as I've started to look at it a little bit, I think it's almost like a forward and backward feeding loop, like
Yeah.
what you just described, right? Where like when I can do the correct things with the hands and apply the right pressures, it frees me up to create ground reaction force more efficiently, more powerfully, and vice versa, right? When I can do things a little bit better with the ground, that might free me up to do something with the hands. Sometimes I watch the way that someone maybe releases or interacts with that club face through impact. And then I go look at their ground reaction forces and thinking, yeah, it's no way you're having to do that to save the shot. Versus some players where they've just got such beautiful, release patterns and things. I think, man, if we could just get a little more energy into the system,
Yeah.
you already have all the capacity in the world to channel it, get it to the club, and get it to the ball where it really matters the very most. I love to see vertical forces at 225%. But ultimately, what I want to see is I want to see club speed and ball speed and a ball traveling in the correct locations on the golf course. That's what matters the most.
Yeah. Okay. One more thing. I teased it. I want to go back there. I'm all about shining the bright light on the bright mind like yours and having you share all of your insights. But I want the listener and the viewer to get it. And most folks have heard of centrifugal force.
Uh-huh.
Talked about the centripetal, where you've got to provide force enough to hold this thing in its orbit around whatever you want to call. I'm going to use the wrong vernacular. So I'll let you describe both, please.
Yeah, and this is great. I literally just taught this to my students last week in my
Okay,
class on campus
go.
because we talk about it in the context of how the body works, and basically the idea is anytime you get a rotating object that's rotating around an axis, again, a golf club around the hands, a leg around a knee, something like that. There are two tendencies of motion of that object. One of them is this tendency or a force that's trying to pull the object towards the axis of rotation. That's that centripetal force. The other one is this centrifugal force, which is actually the idea of that object, that thing actually also trying to leave the axis of rotation. It's trying to fly off on its own. And the example I always give to my students, I say, I put my shoe on really loosely, like half on, and I just start swinging my knee back and forth, and they just watch my shoe fly off into space. And basically, that was a scenario where the relationship of these two tendencies of motions start to kind of gravitate towards that centrifugal force. And now the object flies off of kind of the axis or the circle. Well, I can also have too much from the other, and it would cause compressions and a lot of issues there. And so it's about finding the balance between these two tendencies of motion that create this beautiful kind of arc length where you can create really nice speed angularly. And again, in the golf swing, it's about finding the balance of those two. You got to tie it to your hands, but you also got to allow it to release out to the club and getting the proper relationship of those two forces.
It's so cool when you think about that and you think about, the release of the energy is allowing the centrifugal to do its thing. Let gravity help you. But then you can't let go because then the club will hurtle and you'll never hit the golf ball. But by that being said, I feel like so many golfers, it's not centripetal force they're putting on it. They're putting a different force entirely because they are moving their body. The axis, which is the hand, in your
Yeah.
instance, is not stable enough in an area just to allow that club to pass it by and interact with the ball consistently every time. That's back to your square contact thing.
Yeah, for sure. And you bring up a point too where, again, the fastest players in the world, if you start to look at the way their body gets positioned as they're coming into impact, you can see them almost kind of pull away from that ball a little bit in a really nice way, lengthen everything out. And now they're getting all these benefits of the additional radius that you get for linear velocities. And now you're getting into angular and linear motion. They do beautiful things with the body that set them up to deliver that linear velocity to the club head and the ball. But again, it's like you said, it's coming through the ground, it's coming through our body. But that hand component, let's not forget that hand component and how important that piece of the puzzle is.
Okay. Quick pause so I can catch my breath. You've been on the show before, Tyler. You're a PhD. You're a teacher, a professor at Utah Valley State University. Quickly share the bio for our listeners.
Yeah, so I'm a professor there at Utah Valley University in Utah, and have taught there for 10 years, doing just tons of research as it relates to motion capture, ground reaction force. But again, my passion is in golf. It always has been ever since I was a little boy. And so since that time, even since being on your podcast, I've been able to I continue my work with Superspeed Golf as a consultant for them. I've also been able to joined forces with Smart to Move, which is a portable force plate company, and working there to help with some of their education and research, because I think what we really need is a lot of really good education on the ground reaction force. And then, have also actually been really fortunate over the last couple of years to do a little bit of kind of some independent stuff too with some different markerless motion capture golf companies and things of that nature. Just as much as I possibly can. And now finally, Mark, over the last year, my men's and women's golf team at Utah Valley have now grabbed a hold of me really significantly. The men's coach just asked if I wanted to be a volunteer assistant for the coach. And so a little bit of everything, right?
Because you got so much time, huh? All right, Tyler. You mentioned super speed. They were sort of at the I would say almost the onset/outset of speed protocol training. And your first podcast with me, we talked about that. Since then, we've had Ripstick and we've had the stack system and a lot of folks coming along. Anyhow, sort of Superspeed to me is still the originator of it all. You guys have got an app available now. And look, there's an app for everything, but
Yeah.
I feel like, and I've been doing some golf training aid reviews of late, and I grade them with a few criteria in mind. One, and one of the most important is it's idiot proof.
Yeah.
Because as a teacher, so many golfers look, I don't read the freaking directions. I take the thing out of the box and off I go. And with like speed sticks or super speed sticks, you can stand and swing them fast back and forth, and it'll do you some good, but you're not maximizing what you're
Yeah.
doing. So the app at least will direct the learner, the user, to use the things properly. Tell us some more of the features, please.
Yeah, so I think at a very basic version, just allowing our users to track their speeds was obviously a big request, which was how fast am I swinging each of these different weighted clubs? What's the progress I'm getting with my driver, right? They love to see the stats, right? What do the numbers look like? We've got some fun leaderboard functions where you can sort by handicap tied and age ranges and see kind of where you sit amongst your peers, which I think is a nice, fun, interactive way. And I think to me, that's kind of the surface layer of the app. That's the, hey, this allows us to track the speed training that, like you said, Superspeed's been doing for a little over a decade now. The next piece, really, Mark, actually came from what we tended to find, and this won't shock you with golfers. If they gain 10 to 15 yards off the tee, they want the next 10 to 15 yards, right? It's never quite good enough for them. And so, in a lot of the work that we've been able to do over the last few years, as we've dove really into how ground reaction force generates speeds and how we can train these things, what we basically did is the next part of the app is building just a bunch of protocols where a golfer can go through a really basic assessment and then actually based on that assessment can give them some recommendations of, hey, you need some rotational sequencing work. You need some ground reaction force work. You need some fitness work, which we teamed up with Jason Glass doing some fitness protocols. You need some grip strength work. And so here's kind of how you could do that. And basically what it does is, as you said, the dummy proof, we want to make sure that these golfers are gaining speed the right way.
Yeah.
They're not getting injured. Their body's ready to handle that speed and squeeze every last bit of mile per hour that they can. And so what it does after that first initial tracking is it jumps you in and says, hey, you're really poor at how you utilize the ground. Don't just go out there and jump around. Here's a protocol that we've used. We've been in my labs. We've used golfers, or we've taken golfers through these protocols. We can see that when your lateral force is lacking, here's some drills you can do. We've had you back on the plates, and we see that improves your lateral force. We tried to do that with every single one of these protocols so that golfers can start to move in really efficient manners, in healthy manners, and then even build up a little bit of body from the fitness side to be ready for that extra speed.
Lovely. You talked about all the ways to gain speed, and you referenced um, technique, exploiting ground reaction forces, kinetic sequencing of the chain. You sort of spoke about wellness some, but when you emailed me, you're like nutrition. And
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, okay, because a lot of golfers want to hit it farther, but the hot dog at the turn, and I love hot dogs or whatever, I don't think is doing us any favors. So please shed some light.
Yeah, I'm fortunate at my university to have some really bright minds around me as well. One of my good friends and mentors, Dr. Andrew Creer, specializes in sports nutrition. And then another professor, Dr. Melanie Kelly, who specializes in hydration. They knew I loved golf, and they said, you know what? Let's put together a golf study. Let's get our men's golf team out on the course. First, let's see what they do just out on the course if we don't tell them to do anything. And then let's really start to prescribe the correct amount of macronutrients, the correct nutrition. Should you be eating proteins, carbs, things like that? Have them actually do that, and then start to look at some measurement tools where I was actually able to measure ground reaction forces pre-post round, looking at how over the course of a round, a player who's maybe walking 4.5, 5 hours, how that changes things. We were able to team up with our sports psychologist, Dr. Dispinette, and looking at the psychological changes if you're a little bit better fed versus a little bit underfed. This was a really fun moving part study, and like most research, Mark, it probably answered 2 questions, and I came up with 10 more. But I think and you started it off by saying, hey, the hot dog at the turn or the M&Ms and Gatorade at the turn.
Yeah.
What I would say as an amateur golfer, and for sure as a competitive golfer, is if you're waiting until the ninth hole to grab your M&Ms and Snickers bar and Gatorade, it's too late,
Okay.
right? You got to go into that round really well nutritioned, really well hydrated, and then we kind of described it as an idea of just grazing throughout the round,
Okay.
right? Being able to get the proper amount of calories, shooting for maybe somewhere in the range of about 30 grams of carbohydrates per hour, and really kind of going into that and trying to get that throughout the round. Because honestly, Mark, a lot of golfers, at least what our men's golf team was doing, they would grab a protein bar. They thought, hey, protein bar, it's healthy, and it would have 10, 12 grams of carbohydrates, and they weren't really getting the macronutrients they needed for the activity that golf is, which is really kind of low level aerobic with occasional bursts of speed.
Hmm.
And then, what happens to your body and legs at the end of a round when you're not appropriately nutritioned?
Yikes. Yes. Sounds like I'm going to have to get your colleagues on the show to talk about that as well. But that's real, not necessarily for golfers. Well, even for golfers, who watch this or listening to this who drive golf carts. But yeah, towards the end
Mhm.
of the day, if you're not properly hydrated, certainly, but properly fed, I can certainly see some sort of waning in clubhead speed and such.
For sure. Interestingly enough, this what was really interesting. At least and this is our men's golfer, and they're playing a lot of golf, but their club head speed didn't change throughout the round. It was within like a half mile to a mile per hour out on the course. I will say when we talked about, I think last time we talked about speed coming, right? Like their on-course speeds, most of them were between 118 and 122 out on the course.
They're fast. My
In
goodness.
our golf team. So again, good fast movers. What was really interesting, Mark, is that the way they generated the speed from a ground reaction force standpoint did vary, where every single one of them started to create more rotational torque in their swing at the end of a round compared to what they would do at the start of a round.
So the legs
Uh,
started fading.
yeah, and in fact, one of them I talked to, I said, because he's a beautiful vertical force player. He's always like my example of great vertical force. And I asked him about it, Mark. I said, hey, just talk to me a little bit about it. He's like, well, my legs get tired, Tyler. And so I don't want to push through my legs. I said, okay, perfect. And then I asked him, I said, tell me what happens at the end of your rounds often, and for sure at the end of your days when you're playing 36. And he said, I start balls left and move them left. He just gets so rotational, and then all of a sudden you start to think about his matchups of face and path.
Mhm.
And so it's not, again, Mark, like what I really want to do, because you brought up this idea of just, your 8 handicap in a cart. But still, you play on the weekend, you're out on the course for 4.5, 5 hours, and it's warm. What I really want to do is just take my force plates to a club, a public course, assess as much data as I can, send them on their way playing 18 holes, bring them back, get an assessment of their nutrition, hydration, put them back on the force plates, look at speed. Because I think in amateur golfers, I think you'd see what you are bringing up, which is I think you would see that club face or that club speed start to decline, their movement patterns get really inefficient. And then there's that guy, Mark, that's like, I don't know, they're about ready to shoot their best round of their life and they
Oh,
spray one
guys.
OB on 18.
Yeah. Look, that stuff's real. And I have no doubt I love the anecdote you would share of your model, I'll call him, how he starts to create speed differently. And I'll tell you this from all of my years in instruction, you can see that happening. And
Mhm.
then here's the thing. The intellectually lazy approach is the golf teacher, or if the coach will see this and they're like, you started to do this. And then it's almost like you start to work on the golf swing as opposed to the elements that were involved at the root of the soul, where the
Yeah.
golfer started to, I don't want to say fail, but he just doesn't have, or she doesn't have their best facilities on hand because of bad hydration and nutrition.
Yeah, and not to mention like golf is an interesting thing to train for, right? Because again, especially and maybe I'm targeting the high school, collegiate, professional type players, but it's a lot of walking, it's a lot of steps,
Hmm.
but it's not like this intense exercise. So it's like, how do you capture the right type of training? And again, I'm lucky at Utah Valley University. I've been able to grab the ear of our strength and conditioning coach for our men's golf team, and basically share with him some of these results and kind of start to brainstorm some ideas of, like you said, let's give ourselves every chance to be successful with proper nutrition and hydration. But what can we do from a training standpoint that builds up a little bit more golfing endurance,
Mm-hmm.
that would allow them to maybe be a little closer to the way they were generating speed at the start of the hole, so they can know, a start line and what the club face and path are going to do.
Love it. Yeah, it's again, here's what I want to say to folks, because I'm listening to you and I'm like, yeah, yes, yes, yes. And I'm sure certain folks are looking at this, listening to this, going, that's me. I'm going to go and make sure I eat properly and stuff. And then they do, and they don't necessarily see, not commensurate even, is what they're expecting to see. But
Yeah.
what you're really doing is you're just eliminating all the variables and
Yes.
stacking odds in your favor. Yeah.
Yeah, that's 100% it. Because even looking at scores of our golfers, like, and I told the other researchers, I said, hey, golf's too variable. Like, you can't take scores of one day and one day and measure them with each other. There's way too much going on. But I think what you said is so perfect, Mark. It's stacking the odds in your favor, right? And as a golfer, if you're even just a recreational golfer, just again, run to your local grocery store, Costco, whatever's close by, and grab something that has about 25 to 30 grams of carbs that you like to eat, and stuff a few of them in your bag, and snack on them a little bit throughout the round. That's not a hard thing to do to set yourself up for a chance to be a little more successful at the end of a round.
Mea culpa. I'll admit this in front of our global audience and Tyler. I have now, in hindsight, listening to you, perhaps advised a little too much protein, right? I do, though, towards the end of rounds, I'm fine for that last energy burst to let them grab the Snickers bar or whatever over the last few holes, just to make sure you got something to get over the line. But you talk about 25 to 30 grams of carbs, maybe fruits. I don't know how much you'd get out of that, but
Yeah, again, a banana, like what we did bananas. That was a choice we had for people. We had, again, like some oat bars, some of the like little peanut butter jelly with some oats and some things like that. So again, it's not that we don't want some of the fats and proteins, but in reality, during that physical activity, especially when you're on your feet and just need that energy burst, again, the carbohydrate is the thing that for most people, again, this is, I will admit, again, there's if we have any of our friends who are in the keto field, I want to definitely make sure that I'm recognizing there are people who train their body to utilize different energy systems. I'm talking about those who have not and who would be burning some of those things as their primary energy source, at least during these activities.
all right, let's pivot. Let's get back to GRF, ground reaction force. It's still a lot of conversation. You'll watch the really powerful, fast golfers. You'll see how they use their legs, use the ground, use their feet, kind of the engine of the golf swing, the hips, the core, that sort of thing. Describe to our lay fan listening to this or watching this what this actually represents, because a lot of folks hear this and I fear misunderstanding.
Yeah, and man, that's it's like take 8 weeks of biomechanics and
Okay, off you go.
some summarize it in 10 seconds. So I'll try and say this. What the ground reaction force, let me backtrack. What people tend to see, Mark, is the motions that are occurring from the ground reaction forces, right? I think we tend to see a long drive player, to see a fast player lift up off the ground in the swing. And I think what we fail to sometimes realize is that's not coming from the golfer lifting themselves up. That's coming from the golfer pushing so hard down into the ground that the ground reaction force is propelling them upward, right? And in fact, it's doing two things. One, if you see the Rories with a little bit of a mini squat, that vertical ground reaction force or upward force is going to stop him from like collapsing on his tush in the middle of his swing. That's the first thing it has to do. And then the second thing it does is it helps him kind of lift and kind of create that appropriate delivery of the club, the nice attack angles, the low point control, the body motion that we see. But sometimes what you see golfers do, Mark, is they almost like fake the ground reaction force, where all they're doing is kind of lifting up a front leg while all their weight is still on the back leg. And now they're kind of falling away from the ball, just trying to throw everything at it. They forget that these powerful players have shifted forward, have caught themselves from falling down and push really hard. They're not just lifting feet off of the ground at random points in the swing when they're not stable, when the pressure hasn't shifted the way they want it to.
I want to put it this way too. You talked about, the hand strength to kind of break or slow down the golf club. I would almost, and I just want you to elaborate some, that forward motion, from the trail side to the lead side.
Uh-huh.
I feel like that's misunderstood. And a lot of golfers, they may do that for too long, where
Yes.
the correct use of the ground is that push forward, but then the braking system out of the legs to slow that down to propel the energy to the club. Off you go.
Yeah, that's the one, Mark. That lateral force from the lead leg. You described it as a braking force. That's always how I've described it to golfers. What amateur golfers do, Mark, you brought up the idea that they tend to shift that too long. I would almost add the caveat of they start shifting it too late, and then it ends up getting propagated too far along into the swing, and now they can't create, like, I hate to use the word post up because I don't want it to think this like rigid leg that has to be super straight and all these things, but what it's doing is you're utilizing the ground to stop the shift of your center mass forward so that you can deliver all that energy out to the club. And honestly, Mark, that force is the force that, at least in my research studies, it tends to be the one that's the most highly correlated to swing speed. Again, I've had one long driver on my portable force plates. His lateral force was 60% of his body weight. To put that in context, a regular amateur golfer who's maybe swinging at 92 miles an hour, that force might be 7% of their body weight. So
Like me.
that's a huge difference. Again, even some of my fast collegiate players who are sitting at 122, 123 miles an hour clubhead speed, they might be 25 to 30, but you can like that is a force that you can just see an incremental step up with. The more they can do that, the more speed. But again, I think, Mark, it's because of what they did before, and then they know they have that power and strength to stop things, that they shift the center mass better, they break a little bit better, and then they can create that beautiful delivery out to the club and create all those massive amounts of speed.
Mm, um, that's the lateral element of it. The vertical is a thing too, and that's where you'll see, smaller folks, kind of diminutive, maybe like a Justin Thomas, where
Mhm.
it's such a hard push that the foot pops off the ground. Um, a lot of golfers create this vertical element to it by basically pulling the upper body away
Yes.
from the golf ball
Yeah.
instead of using the lower half. And when I describe it, I said, for the folks listening on audio, Tyler is shaking his head right now. I say to folks, I'm like, yeah, here's your spine angle. It's like you're trying to push into your spine angle as opposed to just raising away from it. And then your all-knowing golfing buddies like, dude, you lifted your head. It's not you lifting your head. It's just, it's all done out of the upper body, just pulling out of posture.
Yeah.
Please talk about the vertical aspects of it and how to do it right.
Yeah, great point. Sometimes I think we talk about this idea of loss of posture and the way the posture can be in the swing. What we see the very best players, and I would say the fastest players in the world do, is their vertical posture, their vertical center mass. They tend to move a little bit up in the backswing. They'll move down in the downswing, especially very early in the downswing. That's key, early in the downswing. And then the last thing they're going to do is then they're going to have that shift upward, but while they're not losing these really powerful angles, right? You'd never see those players, getting to arm parallel on the downswing and all of a sudden be totally straight in their trunk, right? They still have a nice little bend in their trunk. They're still kind of creating this really powerful motion so they can explode through. And again, it's this idea, Mark, of I always like we could describe internal versus external forces,
Yeah.
right? And I can create motion of my trunk just by contracting my back muscles, and that, yes, would lift my center of mass upward and make me appear like I'm lifting up and creating this powerful motion. Or I can utilize my leg muscles to push on the ground and have that ground reaction force shift my entire center mass up. and keep my body in a better position to actually hit the golf ball. And you described it really nicely, where there's too many people who've seen too little about ground reaction force that now become the coaches of ground reaction force. And I think that's where we can get amateur golfers in a lot of trouble.
You've spent time around a lot of greats. And yeah, just before our call, I was scrolling around on social media, just, looking for some of the stuff you've done. And there's a lot of really good stuff. And before I touch on one or two of yours, quickly, I saw Padraig Harrington basically made this comment, and it was like, golfers would do themselves a favor if in the practice swing, you step and then swing.
Yeah.
And he even does it sometimes when he hits, where you swing back and then you just take a little step forward with the lead leg, and that's the propeller for everything, kind of gets the sequence set in motion. Your take, given all your research.
Yeah, and funny enough, I got to spend about a day with
Mhm.
Padraig earlier this year. What a fascinating man! Really well, my goodness, like what a bright guy when it comes to talking about these things. He knows so much, and so it's fun to engage with him. And there was a lot that came out from that. That's a good one there, where you just again creating a little bit. I look at it as dynamic motion, Mark, where what amateur golfers tend to do is they tend to be very rigid in the swing. They tend to not want to activate the feet very well. Padraig is a beautiful example of the total opposite of this, where if you put him on a force plate, his forces are literally jumping all over the place before his club ever moves.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? He's shifting weight, he's getting ready to move his body laterally. And so that step drill can be a really effective way for a player who's very used to being rigid and tied to the ground to say, hey, you know what? Let's let my feet be a little free. Let's shift some things forward. Let's put a little bit of forward momentum into that swing. The one caveat I'll say to that too, Mark, is they do have to be able to generate this braking force of what we just described, right? Like, because sometimes, Mark, I'll have players who do that step drill and they don't get any faster. Partially, I think that's because their inability of creating this braking force that you've described. But I think such a good way, and in this message that Padraig will tell of be dynamic. Even hit, and he will. I know he won't mind me sharing this because that's just the kind of person he is. But even when we were looking at some of his forces, he had kind of created a little bit of a pre-shot routine and sight pattern that he said was making him a little more static in his feet.
Okay.
And when he saw some of that data, he's like, "Ooh, I got to make sure that I'm really dynamic in my feet." So I tend to really try and get players to be athletes at setup, right? Athletes at setup.
Yeah, I would say so. And I'll say this. I've cured, well, cured is a big word, but I've helped a lot of golfers who can't chip and pitch, and certain folks who kind of had the yips with that sort of thing because they're so static, they're so married to the ground, they're so keeping their head down, where if they start with their feet together and just take the gentlest of steps, as you're
Yeah,
swinging back, you start stepping in the opposite direction. All of a sudden, they cure their chipping and pitching woes in the blink of an eye.
yeah. Yeah, that lateral, I've fallen in love, Mark, with the lateral forces. Again, this is towards the target, away from the target. I think it sets it with we're recording this right before Thanksgiving, so I will say that lateral force, it sets the dinner table. It sets the Thanksgiving table that allows the rotational and vertical to feast. And if we can't get that lateral in play, like it doesn't matter how good we can do those other things.
Oh, golly, now you've started me. Forgive me. But yeah, we live in the era of the internet, and if you can go down rabbit holes, and if I hear or see stuff on the internet, maybe it's the algorithm that's got me, but I'll talk about a lot of wrist alignments, a lot of, you know, not extended wrists. They call it a shot killer, where I've seen a lot of golfers with a slightly extended wrist who were great. And then you hear a lot of folks talk about rotation, 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 and club face stabilization or rate of closure minimalization.
Mm-hmm.
And these poor golfers are rotating back and forth like spinning tops, and they can't hit the club ball on the club face squarely ever.
Yep. Yep. It's well, Mark, I think lateral got a bad name when we paired it with sway,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
right? And I think what happened is golfers misunderstood the concept of we're still producing lateral forces, we're just controlling them very well, we're timing them very well.
Yeah, timing's crucial. I'll add to that statement too. I think when people think lateral, and yeah, I am the case study for this. I grew up at a coastal venue, the wind howled for 360 days a year. And I was always a bit of a club face slinger. So the way I flighted the thing down was I moved all of me to the lead side, not just my lower body. So, the lateral for me too is where's the lower half in relation to the upper half?
Yep, yeah.
Because I'm trying to keep my head behind the ball for so long, and I look at myself and I'm still straight up and down over the top of the thing.
Yeah, and you bring up another point, which is probably another hour's worth of podcast episode, which we haven't really looked at the interplay of how these forces create torques.
Yeah.
And so one of the main torques we talk about is this rotational torque, right? But another one that you're starting to see come out more and more and more are the frontal plane torques and the sagittal plane torques. And the one that you just described, kind of the way that our upper body is interacting with the lower and things like that, the lateral force can really help us leverage that frontal plane torque and help create some of those separations, create some nice positions of our body. Again, the better you are producing lateral force, the better you're going to be at creating this, again, like this type of motion. Think of a cartwheel type motion in those really effective ways, in a good way, right? It's sometimes, I know we can get in bad positions for sure there, but every good player has some bit of that just at the right time and to the right magnitude.
For the folks, go and watch YouTube. It's not graphics, but you'll see Tyler moving back and forth. It's basically side bend if you research anything, and having the correct amount of side bend, because you're right. The modern day golfer now, because these super shot club faces, they're getting more and more and more of that stuff, and we see lots of lower back niggles because of, injuries are becoming rampant. The speeds at which they're going, if you get too much of that stuff going on, but that's another podcast we're going to deal with.
For sure.
Okay. Tyler, I've kept you for a long time, I know. I ask this question of people that fascinate me. And it's like a parting shot for the golfers, apart from going to go and find the Superspeed app and go and look at your social media. There's lots of good stuff there. If you had to say, this is something I know for sure, or is it pertains to this ground reaction force thing, or maximizing whatever your personal best in clubhead speed is? I know that's a big subject, but can you condense that? Because I know everyone's listened to this, they've watched this, they're like, I'm going to go hit balls and I'm going to try and speed up properly now. But I need you to say, just be careful, or go and do this, or something to that effect. Are you with me there?
Yeah, I would say this, right? Don't make sure that you understand the importance of your trail and lead legs laterally, right? So I would say one of the best things a golfer could do to try and generate speed is when we talk about loading the trail leg, think about not just pushing straight into the ground with that trail leg, but think about pushing really hard away from the target as well, right? That's going to create the very best positions for you to create the very best ground reaction force and set everything up in the swing. So that's one thing I would say for sure.
I'm going to keep you for longer, just because a lot of folks are hearing this like, okay, I get this, but I don't get it. So you're saying to us, it's how the trail leg is lowering. And I'll tee you up with this. Gary Player said, Gary Player told me that he got one lesson from Hogan. And Hogan took a club and basically held it down, his trail leg, his right leg. And when he wound up, he said, never bump this club and go away from it on the way in the downswing. Is that what you're describing there?
Yeah, he was trying to teach him huge lateral forces, because the only way that you can stop you from hitting over that is by creating a ton of ground reaction force. Again, remember, pushing away so that the ground reaction force pushes you towards and you don't move too far off the ball. I will say, Mark, I'm okay with a little bit of movement off the ball, right? I think that can be an effective way for people to generate speed. It's when you get into positions that I think you were talking about with Gary and Ben, where you start to bump that hip out as you shift your body over. That is a killer, right? That is a killer. But that lateral force, Mark, I just feel like, so here's the other thing I would say. Most of the golfers, and I'm probably answering this too long, but I would say most of your golfers probably played another sport growing up. Baseball, basketball, volleyball, cricket, wherever they're listening to, because you have a worldwide audience. When they were getting ready to move in those sports, they were always actively interacting with the ground.
Yeah.
They were pushing, they were getting ready. When that defender was coming or they're getting ready for a ball to come, they didn't just all of a sudden turn on the ground reaction force and then go move. They were ready to engage to begin with. And so that's why I would say tell like golfers at address, don't be rigid, don't have your feet in concrete. Think you're that basketball player, that volleyball player, that baseball player who's pushing down and out with both feet, down and out with both feet. That's going to be something that makes you much more athletic and powerful in your swing.
I got foot torque lessons for you too, but I want to quickly ask you this. Could that be the reason? Because I've seen pictures of it that Hogan had an extra row of spikes on his trail shoe because he was pushing so hard away from him with that trail leg.
Yeah.
The foot wouldn't slide.
Yeah, interestingly enough, yes, because that would help increase his coefficient of friction. Because once you start pushing lateral, you're going to push a little less vertical,
Okay.
and you lose friction when you push less vertical. And
Interesting.
so he needed to kind of play with that friction equation to say, you know what, if I'm not going to have this big vertical, let's create a stickier surface
Hmm.
so that I can leverage that friction and get it. No doubt about that's why he was doing that.
Brilliant. I'm bringing you back to talk about foot torques in the future. Tyler, in the
Let's
meantime,
do it.
please share for folks where they can find you.
Yeah, Instagram tends to be my probably number one thing. So Tstandy, TSTANDY on Instagram. A little bit of Twitter here and there, and then for sure you can find me at any of the Utah Valley University sites. And nothing's better than getting a message from a golfer who's listened and has a follow-up question. It's the funnest part of my job, honestly, Mark, is working with golfers.
Yeah, one of those is going to be me. Tyler, you're the best. In my opinion, the brightest mind when it comes to this sort of stuff. So I'm thankful you would join me and certainly be so willing to share with all of our fans. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it, Mark. Always fun.